Hello, broadcasting live from the Mobile World Congress. I'm here with Vanessa and Petar and Arthur, and we're broadcasting live the episode number 12?
8.
Number 8. Yeah.
OpenStack. February 20.
Never mind. Okay. So anyway, let's start with a quick round of introduction of the people on the panel here today. So we'll start with Vanessa, which look the fresher one from the audience here.
So I'm Vanessa Little. I'm the NFV ecosystem architecture lead for VMware.
Cool. Petar.
And my name is Petar Torre. I'm in Intel Service Provider Group as technical lead.
We'll also have Paul Drew from Metaswitch joining us shortly, and
Arthur Berezin, Director of Product for Cloudify.
Excellent. So I think we'll do a kind of a quick introduction of everyone impression. So we just started the round of introduction. So why don't you introduce yourself? Just had the two gentlemen joining us. Okay. So the agenda for today would really be to kind of, we're in the last day of Mobile World Congress, and we're kind of wrapping up of our understanding of where the NFV landscape looks like. And so we got here an interesting view both from Intel and VMware and Metaswitch, and obviously us in Gigaspaces. So hopefully we'll give you a little bit more of a broader view of how the NFV landscape looks like today after Mobile World Congress, definitely in comparison to Mobile World Congress last year. And that would be basically the first questions to the panelists here. How do you see the NFV landscape this year in comparison to last year? I'll start with you, Vanessa.
Well, I think there's a pretty drastic shift now where we're seeing NFV is no longer a science experiment. It's actually taken seriously as a valid production path for most providers now. And the providers that haven't deployed it yet are already looking at it. It's definitely the trend where the industry is going. And you can see that at the show where most of the providers that play in that space have an NFV pavilion here, and they have dedicated staff to that now. Whereas in the past, there was sort of a smaller business unit or a bit of a tiger team that used to address that need. Now you're seeing proper business units being spun up globally across all the companies that work in this space. So it's pretty exciting to see how much it's expanded in a year for sure.
Yeah, and Petar, Intel has an interesting kind of a role in NFV. I mean, people wouldn't necessarily associate Intel with NFV per se, but you kind of considered the trusted advisor for a lot of companies from what I could see. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this is seeing this whole NFV tornado really picking up is like dream coming true. We have solid foundation on virtualization technology, cloud principles understood. All the processors are powerful to run this type of environments. And after proving some initial performance things years ago, finally we come to solid number of deployments, telecoms really deploying initial use cases, and not just a control plane. We see it also for data planes. So this is really going in the right direction. We get very busy in discussions on how this thing gets done technically, but the changes also on procedures and organization. So it's really exciting time.
And from where you look at the industry right now, and again in comparison to last year, do you see that advancing in the speed that you would anticipate it will advance, or is it slower than you advance? What do you see are the main obstacles in the industry right now?
I'm techie. I have to resolve all these dependencies. So for me, things are happening very fast. For our sales directors, things are happening rather slow in terms of ramping numbers. But this is realistic speed of telco industry doing the transformation. So this is just feeling right.
Okay. And Metaswitch, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
So hi, I'm Paul Drew from Metaswitch. I run our mobile group, and we've been very involved with NFV here. We are in 8 partner demos at the show, all around NFV. It is absolutely is huge this year compared to last year. It was quite big last year, but this year NFV has really been a hot topic across the industry. And we're starting to see Metaswitch. We have about 25 virtual deployments worldwide. Fair number, most of them on VMware today, some on OpenStack. But we're starting to see the big carriers in the full-on, in the proof of concept, testing out in the lab phase, with expectations of deployments probably of Manos in 2017. I've seen like full lists of dates when they're going to deploy different functions with a Mano from big carriers, with quarter by quarter rollout, starting with often virtual EPC or virtual DRA, virtual SBC, virtual IMS, PCRF, all sorts of different functions, but actual laid out programs of when they're going to roll stuff out, and they're actively in the mode of selecting Mano vendors today. So this has really taken off. Last year was much more of a science project and people interested. Now it seems to have switched to real, yes, we're going to do this, we know when we're going to do it, and we're on a program to make it happen.
Now, interestingly enough, I think both Metaswitch and Gigaspaces are kind of open source player in that sense. And Arthur, you're the product manager of Cloudify within Gigaspaces, but you also came from Red Hat. What's your view of what's happening in the open source world and how much open source plays a role in NFV? What you've seen so far?
And yeah, so I think like the largest shift that I've personally seen in this event is the amount of collaboration between vendors. So we have the OpenO initiative announced. We also have the OSM initiative announced, which effectively trying to achieve basically the same goal, maybe with different strategies and different tool sets. But it's really it's really exciting to see a collaboration between vendors that are sometimes natural for them to collaborate. Sometimes it's not always natural, but we definitely see them like sit at the same table and discuss, how do we jointly solve a problem that the market has. So I think that's a major, from my perspective, a major shift that I've been.
And how much open source plays a role in that industry right now? Because traditionally, telcos wasn't that much open source players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think today it's become very clear that open source is and key parts that the components that you use have an element of open source in them, so others can jointly share the effort.
Excellent. So anyone wants to add a comment about the last questions about open source, open standard right now before I wrap up that question? Move to the next one.
I'll say something about it. Open source, it is playing absolutely in very, like OpenStack is key. VMware is very active and pushing in the NFV space, but we're seeing a lot of big carriers very keen to move to OpenStack, which is obviously all open source. And there are initiatives around, mentioned Open Mano. I suspect that we will end up with OpenStack and Linux as all open source, and then more VNFs there, more specialized, and I think they will carry on being licensed platforms. And there may be a mode for an open source Mano to take their Gigaspaces and Cloudify. I think you've got a good opportunity there. And the model with vendors selling support, like with Clearwater or open source IMS, we sell a support package that goes alongside it, but we're competing against licensed platforms. But I think the VNFs in the main are looking like they're going to be licensed. The licensing may change over time. It may be subscription based as you use. So sort of like I had 100,000 subs this month, I've got 200,000 this month, and you pay a monthly fee rather than an upfront CapEx.
So I have more question on that, but I'll ask them. I kind of wanted to get Vanessa's view on open source. So we're going to see VMware going to the route of open source. I've seen you actually announcing support for OpenStack as an example. What's the strategy from a VMware
so I mean, at VMware, we definitely recognize the industry clamoring for not so much open source, but open platforms. Platforms that have open APIs that are very easily integratable and interconnected, and the flexibility stays there. Everyone is terrified of vendor lock-in, and when they hear VMware, they just assume that it's a closed system. And we're working pretty hard to change that perception, because we are in fact not a closed system. And by launching the VMware integrated OpenStack, I think we're that's our way of saying we recognize the industry is going there and we fully support it. And a lot of the gaps that we're seeing right now with some of the open source deployments that aren't making it all the way to production are always around support and processes and procedures. The technology is sound, but the day two operations is the challenge. So that's where VMware sort of tried to step up and say, okay, well, we also support OpenStack.
So do you see that changing in the messaging? Like I think that OpenStack in VMware, the value product, as I think it is called, will be more officially promoted because it's been kind of an orphan child for a long time, and it looks like it's getting closer to the center stage. Is that the direction?
Yeah, I mean, in the last couple of years, the marketing around it wasn't very overt. It was almost a bit of an internal secret that yeah, we support it, but I think we just wanted to make sure that it was as rock solid as the rest of our platform before we presented it to the world. And now I think we finally arrived at a version that we're happy with presenting with the richness and robustness that the rest of our platforms have. The VMware integrated OpenStack is there as well. And that was why we didn't really discuss it until now. But now you're going to see a big push from VMware and a lot of marketing and media around it, just to get the word out, because I think a lot of people don't realize how open our platform really is.
It's a good point. We'll get back to that now. Petar, Intel is kind of taking a very interesting role in that industry, as I mentioned earlier, being the trusted advisor for a lot of those carriers. You've been involved in a couple of, if you like, standard bodies, almost everything that is moving in that industry, both NFV, and now there's been a big announcement around OpenO. Is that kind of spreading yourself and trying to edge between them? Are you making specific bets on who would win at some point, or what's your strategy with regard to the standardization?
Yeah, so we'll continue our open approach, meaning for sure we need to, whenever we have hardware out, we need to have all the drivers and all these pieces out, but not just that, we will continue contributing heavily to OpenStack.org and all the relevant communities like Open Daylight and so on.
What does it mean, contribute?
Contributes means having, for open source effort of Intel, we have thousands of software developers on full-time job to do this thing.
You also have seen investing in Mirantis and Rackspace and some other players.
Driving this whole industry towards more hyperscale cloud type of principles and environment. Looking at what are all the dependencies on the way, and learnings that we have from enterprise environments and cloud environments, applying now to telco carrier networks, and virtualization in cloud, just like basic principles and everything that goes along. So on one side, this based on this open approach, and I was mentioning some of these communities, plus we were happily from the beginning of NFV and OPNFV over there, and now we are happy to be advisor and consultant for those newly formed open source Mano was announced, and then also initially led by China Mobile OpenO. This type of communities that have their own purpose in solving particular problems that we will, I hope, touch here a little bit more in the podcast. So we will continue all these efforts. And while on one side we have finite number of resources, some of these we consider to be critical, and we have to we find our ways to continue driving these things forward and being
so basically that means that Intel is going to keep on being kind of a contributor to more than one project, or more than one consortium, kind of be involved in as many, well, at least the one that are pretty active right now.
As long as open is defined by having multiple serious contributors competing between themselves, competitors both contributing and maintaining this type of environments, we see these things as truly open, and yes, we will try to stay involved. minimum.
Yeah,
and for sure.
Yeah, so let's open up kind of an interesting kind of discussion about the VNF of the world, and the VNF being the actual network provider, the one that are delivering the switches, the Brocade, the Cisco, the Juniper of the world, all those type of guys that are actively being in that industry or the leading industry for a long time. Metaswitch is kind of a different players in that game. Do you see the VNF landscape, the networking providers landscape, changing because of that move to virtualization?
Absolutely. So Metaswitch is mostly playing in the telecom space, which has been strongly dominated by the big 10 manufacturers, Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia. And the whole move to NFV is shaking that industry up significantly. One of the key benefits that operators are seeing and want is the ability to mix and match VNFs from different vendors and get best of breed vendors, avoiding the vendor lock-in, which was mentioned earlier on. So with a integration into Mano, so they can have a Mano platform, you can have catalogs of different VNFs, you can integrate it in. It reduces the friction to introduce a new vendor into their network.
Yep.
And there's often a contrast. You get the CTO group and a big operator. They want to go with a new vendor. You go to the engineering operations group and they go, but it's going to take me a year to get it through IT to actually get it integrated into my network. Can't we just stick with our existing incumbent vendor? And I think NFV enables them to jumpstart that. One of our customers, Manx Telecom, has deployed a fixed line virtualized network, IMS-based virtual network. They've cut across on their proprietary platform. They've got their NFV environment there, and they are now rolling out all sorts of other applications on top of it. So they're putting load balancer, they're putting a DRA, they're just rolling out functions, and they can do this. They told us yesterday, the CTO said, used to take us 6 months to roll something new out. We can do it now in under a month. And they've got a schedule of rolling out 4 new functions into their network in the next 4 months, which they've never been able to do before. And it makes them hugely more flexible and able to address issues that customers want and provide new services quickly and rapidly.
Very interesting. I think that's a kind of call for a big disruption that are happening in the industry. Vanessa, being at the partner front, if you like, of the VMware side, you're working with a lot of those vendors. How do you see that market shaping?
So it's really interesting because, as he mentioned, the industry was formerly, it was under a stranglehold by the big players like the Nokia, Ericsson, Cisco, etc., because they manufactured physical iron that you put in the data center to do that, and to remove those devices was extremely cumbersome. Now we're seeing not only are the big boys virtualizing their products, but the NFV platform is giving the opportunity for smaller companies to just sort of pop up out of nowhere. These are, software development houses that started with 10, 20 people, and they crank out a really compelling VNF, and they're hitting the market and taking out, they're displacing VNFs from Cisco, Ericsson, Nokia. And it's driving the best of breed, and it's really driving excellence in the field, because there's all of this vicious competition that wasn't possible before. So
do you see entrance of new players that weren't there before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like even at this show, we have a number of people at our pavilion doing demos that if network was still a hardware-based play, they wouldn't be anywhere near there. They
Can you
wouldn't be
mention
able
a few
to
names that comes?
well, Metaswitch is one. We had a really, really interesting demo with one of your competitors named Athanet out of Italy, and they're a really small shop, and they're just a bunch of clever guys who wrote some wicked code, and they're able to compete on the same stage, and they just popped up out of nowhere. So I mean, the demos that we have with yourselves, Gigaspaces, we have Scenics. Ericsson is there as well. So it's really interesting to see a company as small as yours, even right beside Ericsson, competing at the same level. And I think one of the great benefits about NFV and just the architecture allows a leveling of the playing field that we hadn't seen before. And so there's huge industry disruption. I think that's going to continue, and it's going to accelerate in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, a question to you, maybe Arthur, again coming back to the to that NFV landscape and how it is being shaped. How do you see the integration? I think it was mentioned here. We kind of reduce the barrier to entry, which allows startups and other new companies to get in. What is the main challenges that you see to get more of those vendors playing in that? How much complexity plays a role in that, and how much we can adopt new models like microservices and the likes of DevOps into that mix, which is completely different models to the way those things have been running so far.
So I think like there are two major barriers that some players need to cross or need to think about maybe differently than the way they think about it today. So the first challenge is business-wise. So businesses have to understand how do they make money, first of all, out of those collaborations, out of going into open source, out of open sourcing maybe some portions of their existing proprietary code, maybe starting a new open source project. So they need to figure out like what's in it for them for the long run, not only achieving some sort of mild goal and keep doing what they do today. And the second challenge there is like how do you make the actual integrations work, because not everyone's starting out of supporting open APIs and open integration points. So it's sometimes really challenging to integrate between those multiple VNFs and multiple vendors playing around, especially when you have new guys coming and playing together with old school guys, and technology-wise are completely different. Mm-hmm. So it's really tricky sometimes to make those endpoints work together really well, and those that actually make it work well are the ones that we're gonna see carry on and then succeed in the future.
So do you see DevOps practices and microservices and containers being part of that new modern stack, or is that going to be left out of the equation?
Yeah, definitely. That's actually an interesting remark. So we've seen in the past, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, the whole DevOps movement's popping basically out of nowhere and making the whole IT and the whole operation side of the house much lighter, much simpler. The tools there are much more powerful, and basically you can achieve anything that you want way quicker than it used to be. So you used to go to a vendor, ask him on helping you on some sort of integration. It would take you several iterations until you get something actually working. So the whole DevOps move actually makes things much quicker to implement. And the whole notions that are coming out of the microservices approach into NFV makes things move quicker. So as Petar mentioned before, things are moving lightweight fast. I think these notions coming out of DevOps, coming out of them microservices, and then the approaches that the DevOps guys are using to implement are definitely popping into NFV. And this is
something interesting that I heard from even AT&T is that they're starting to expose API to their network backend to allow ecosystem players to actually plug into that, which is, if you think about it 2 years ago, people would think that you're not even thinking about the idea. So I think that kind of an interesting question to Vanessa here. I mean, that puts an interesting questions of the entire culture of structures of companies that were building very network-centric type of, if you like, DNA. Now they're becoming closer to a regular IT, and some would say regular enterprise and regular web-scale applications. And what's going to be the change that you foresee for that industry going forward? I mean, are we still going to see network-centric kind of companies, or is that going to be just web scale companies that happens to serve voice services alongside many other things?
Yeah, I think it really opens the door to a lot of companies that were traditional enterprise IT, in that they can start adopting NFV as a strategy internally with very minimal change to their operational procedures. Whereas traditionally they would have a separate network team, and it would be sort of a closed system, and you'd have the super nerds in their little black shirts sitting in a quiet room in the back that took care of the network, and no one really knew what they do. But now with NFV, you have traditional enterprise type operators are able to deploy it on their own without having to have deep technical knowledge of the network. So I mean that's pretty interesting to see that capability is there. I'm not seeing that as a general industry trend right now, but what I am seeing is a lot of companies want to move more toward this one cloud strategy where instead of having a separate cloud for your enterprise IT workloads and a separate cloud for your NFV workloads, they're all migrating to be one massive cloud. And the challenges that we're seeing now are how do you manage that? How do you orchestrate that? And that's where players like yourselves come in. And that's where all of the ecosystem partners come in. Customers are no longer just looking for a platform and then doing all the work to integrate the VNFs themselves. They're looking more for a solution. They want to see, what's everybody else doing, what's working. They don't want it to be a science experiment because this is their production core network. So one of the initiatives that we're working on, and I mean this is common across the industry, is we're making more capabilities and more resources available to all of the VNF partners, so that they can certify on our stack more rapidly, like quickly and easily, and be able to share the world and have more of a community-driven type model, where as opposed to just having the customer run around and shop the way they used to traditionally buy IT software.
And Petar, it looks like you have a lot of things.
A comment on that. So we observed how this developed over a number of years, and saw it at tier 1 telecoms, at smaller telecoms, how different departments were traditionally running the network. And in bigger telecoms, there's a very separate IT organization from people running, like planning, operating care network. So now NFV tells them to run on top of each other. So we have interesting combinations. And in another additional thing that happens is because of sorting orchestration properly, we can have the services built. Now the question is, which of those departments is owning this? So there are different telcos have different approaches, how they organize themselves in the short and the long term for that. We saw that the smaller telecoms have easier job in a number of cases because they already merged those departments. So they don't have this mental different team we need to talk to. This is all one team, and they're all kind of.
So when you say merge, it's the IT now becoming owner of the network services as well.
I'm saying that they already merged the department in terms of how people are fitting in the organization. They, from the same department, operate two different environments, and now they want these environments to merge also. So for them, the job is now more technical and process-wise.
So just to clarify, what you said is that they started first to say we have two separate environments, but we'll have one group serving them both.
This is for smaller telecoms.
And later we'll merge also the environment themselves. That's kind of the evolution that you're saying.
Have two things to do. They have to merge both environments, but also the departments.
And which one is more complex?
Obviously, organizational changes in bigger telecoms are more complicated, but to really get advantage out of NFV, I mean, processes at minimum need to be changed. And in many cases, it happens that there is some optimization also to be done on the org side.
I've absolutely seen exactly the same. And often the engineering, the voice networking, and the data networking reports into the CTO, and the IT group reports into the CIO. So they only actually meet at the CEO in a massive multi-billion-dollar company. And the politics within an organization is a big challenge. It needs both ground up and top down to merge those two and get groups working together.
So you interact mostly with whom in Metaswitch?
So typically we are selling the functions into the CTO engineering group, but then we have the platforms get deployed on top of the cloud infrastructure. So then we have to actually engage with the IT group to actually get it deployed. And that turns into quite an interesting challenge.
And for the computing, let's say IT computing vendor is the other way around. So when we looked at how to really resolve the problem, we figured out that we need both competencies, because on one side we have people who for living are running virtualized servers for years. On the other side, people are operating networks for living. And we try to on one side, one of the dependencies there that we looked at and resolved, and yesterday this was announced, is we have Network Builders University. All the workshops that we were doing over the years for all these telecoms, so for both audiences.
So Network Builders, can you
in Network Builders, as part of the Network Builders program, we have now university, and we have 6 hours of trainings targeting exactly the telecoms and this type of two audiences to get them further. On one side, network professionals into all this virtualization and cloud and what is OpenStack and how this whole thing is supposed to run. And also the IT virtualization experts on what is specific stuff about data plane, NFV, packet processing. So this is
interesting. So, sorry about that. That's actually, I think, an interesting development, I think, from VMware, because VMware wasn't really considered a telco player for a long time. And actually that shift opens the door to VMware to become a telco players because of that organization shift. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We now have a unique business unit to specifically address that. And because there are very stark differences between the traditional enterprise IT workloads and telco workloads, even if the underpinnings of the technology stack are the same, how it's actually deployed and utilized are quite different. So VMware definitely recognizes that. And I mean, in the NFV space, you have very unique challenges there, and it needed to have a separate business unit to address it, absolutely.
And Arthur, being on the open source side of that story, together with Clearwater and Metaswitch, how much do you see the role of developers changing in this kind of game, in this organizational change, culture change? Are developers becoming more the leading of those decisions, or is that still kind of the man in the high heel kind of decision-making process?
Yeah, so I think, since there's this whole shift in the industry, and as Vanessa mentioned earlier on, now you see like the smaller players like moving really quickly, offering amazing solutions, just group of really core hardcore engineers working on something really good. So I think these players are really important in this industry. These are actually the shift makers of this industry, and obviously having open source tools and having open source actual implementations, it's crucial part of this whole game. So for example, you have a core team offering some sort of open source tool or open source solution for a VNF, or for example using some sort of open source framework that could be leveraged by another company, and this like starts to roll the ball, and the ball grows with time. Obviously, you have more people coming.
So do you see people starting downloading products and getting them into the data center, kind of the grassroots approach, and all of a sudden the CIO gets in his data center without necessarily a process, and he has to kind of become that? Do you see that happening actually now?
So definitely we've seen this happen a lot, and then I think you'll see that more and more happening in the telco space, which is like traditionally not it's usually did not used to happen almost at all. So now we're going to see that more and more in the telco space as well, not only in enterprise IT. So
we've seen that quite a lot with Project Clearwater.
Yeah, exactly.
Multiple times. 10 minutes. Oh, by the way, we've already downloaded it. We've got it up and running in our network. We just want you to tell us more about this bit or that bit. And that has hugely shifted the barrier to entry to getting into a network. Previously, you have to go and pitch to the carrier, explain what you're doing, convince them of the right solution, sign sort of network product evaluation agreement, go through procurement, and then eventually a few months later it might get into the lab. Whereas the guys in the lab are just downloading it, getting it up and running, and then there's kind of a ground up push, and they're going, this is really good, and they kind of push it up, and we've got something up and running, and they'll show it up to the upper management or more senior management layers, and they go, oh wow, like we can actually do something with this. So there's a different shift there.
Yeah, so it's kind of a way to democratize the landscape of telcos as well. I think it follows similar trend that we've seen in the enterprise space before. wrapping up for before we move to the next, if you like, topic on that, which is obviously my favorite topic, which is orchestration and what have you. So if I kind of summarize the main points, we do see a big change or a big shift towards NFV this year, bigger than last year. We're starting to see more and more people starting to actually not just do POCs and talk about NFV, they're actually starting to roll out more and more services in that direction. We're seeing definitely the emergence between the enterprise space and the networking side becoming more common, both organizationally and on the infrastructure side. But that's I think fairly in infancy kind of stage in my view right now from an organization change specifically.
So I think it's really crucial to have actual solutions and actual working code out there publicly available for everyone. So for example, we launched the Project Aria, which is basically a lightweight task orchestration tool. It's not the full-blown product, not a full-blown or any other products for orchestration that deals with a lot of scope. Simple, lightweight tool, people can consume it, use it, and I think the more solutions and actual implementation we're going to see out there on GitHub or
so that actually calls to the next question. Maybe on that is what we're seeing clearly in the industry right now, and I think Intel being involved in some of them, and I know that VMware has been wandering around different solutions, is that definitely there is also, the orchestration becomes a very popular topic right now, because as soon as the data center becomes something that you could talk to in an API and the networking become accessible through API with NSX and neutral in the case of OpenStack, all of a sudden there is no limit on what you could automate. And that brings the management and the layer of automation to, if you like, the center stage of a lot of the discussions, especially when people figure out the infrastructure. But the reality is that we're seeing a lot of different vendors starting to build their own orchestration. It's the VNF vendors building it for their own management. It's the carriers themselves to manage the different VNFs. There are different consortium of carriers that are trying to consolidate that and create some sort of de facto standard somehow. And we're starting to see multiple initiatives coming from OpenStack, OpenNFV, OpenO, whatever you. How do you see that orchestration landscape evolving? I'll start maybe with Clearwater, because I think you've gone through that couple of cycles around that already.
Clearwater's been involved in a lot of onboarding with Manos because we were one of the first VNFs and it is publicly available. Project Clearwater was launched in 2013.
It becomes kind of the hello world, I think.
It has become the hello world de facto VNF. We've seen a couple of major trials with the tier 1 carriers where they have said to Mano vendors, we want you to show orchestration of Clearwater. Something else we've got in-house, but Clearwater's been their lead. Where Mano's going is still interesting. I think it is tending towards that the tier 1 operators are wanting to select a Mano vendor to manage their network, and they seem to be open to both open source opportunities and products, and also products from the likes of the big systems integrators. So HP, Netcracker, they're all playing in this space. Mm-hmm. What I haven't seen so much is them wanting to get one of the big 10 vendors bringing in a Mano, because I think they're feeling that just locks them in. Mm-hmm. So while Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia are offering a complete solution and they'll offer you OpenStack and everything, I think that people are very worried that you just get locked in because that's their history. Yep. And actually, they view the Mano as it's kind of like the keys to the kingdom. You have to have something open there so you can put other platforms in. Otherwise, if you lock that piece, well,
no one else can get to
nobody
kingdom.
Else can get in.
Yep.
And Metaswitch Clearwater, we've integrated and been onboarded with almost all the Mano products. The only one who was cloud banned from Alcalu is the only one which was from a big existing manufacturer. The existing TEMs, they have not wanted yet to work with third-party onboarding and third-party VNFs. Like they might say it in practice, say that publicly, but in practice they just haven't done it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's probably going to be, you get Deutsche Telekom or Verizon or whoever it might be will probably select a Mano platform, and then they will push all their vendors and say, you need to have onboarded with X. And that's what you need to do to get into the network. But the onboarding process is becoming much simpler as people get more experienced at it, and VNF vendors figure out what they need to do to their platforms to make it easier to do.
Yep. So Vanessa, again, being in the center of the partner, you kind of have an interesting view of all the players there. Now they're struggling with that orchestration question because we've seen them, like in the case of Clearwater, I mean, they have to support more than one orchestration, which it's a big hassle in a way to deal with. How do you see that evolving? I mean, do we see a conversion in that trend? Do we see that a barrier that is going to be evolved?
I absolutely do. I mean, in the past few years, even deploying an NFV stack has always been cumbersome because of the lack of a strong Mano solution from anyone. And now you're seeing other vendors starting to push things into market, but they're all very unique, and each vendor has their own unique take on it, and so there's not wide adoption of any one of them because of that fear of vendor lock-in, that fear of the inability to integrate, the fact that it is a bit cumbersome to integrate with all of them, so most people just integrate with none of them. So now we're seeing this trend where the industry is clamoring for standards. Standards. And as those standards mature and are refined and start actually making good sense, you're going to see a lot of the Mano vendors starting to align with those standards, and that problem is going to go away. And it's not going to be a cumbersome integration with every single different Mano vendor. It'll be a one-time integration with a standard API.
Mm-hmm.
And so that evolution is definitely coming. That's what the industry wants. It's what they need. So I think that's definitely going to be where it goes.
Mm-hmm. And part of the kind of leading standard that I think exists there is obviously Tosca and Young. And I know that Intel is kind of been playing with the two ones, and I know also we've been discussing it, I think, with VMware. How do you see the standardization thing evolving? Is that going to be Tosca and Young? It's going to be Tosca or Young? Is that going to be something else?
Those two seem to be, on average, what we get feedback from people that really deployed things and from VNF vendors that have functions to describe as one good to describe the virtual machines and how to instantiate them. The other one being good because it's designed to configure the network functionality.
So Young is for, so when you're saying one, you mean
Tosca.
Probably Young for the configuration of the network,
yes.
and Tosca for the machines and topology.
Something that is actively discussed in this type of forums like Open Source Mano. Expectation from our side, ideally, this forum will figure out what is this, I mean, this is the goal over there, what is this common information model, and in some ideal world, we will converge other communities discussing similar things to that. When I discuss these things with different Mano vendors, I still have to find a single one who would disagree that if telcos come to conclusion that this is the way to describe the function, that they will not implement it this way. They will, of course, implement it. Mm-hmm. And they will happy if this thing happen. Faster the better, because then they can go and do their orchestration work on top of it. From that side, while we do that, from all the work in the lab, in performance and in deployment environments, we learn how critical it is to take care of predictability and performance of the whole NFV platform. And this is something that we worked, among others, also with you to expose this type of platform awareness features, so that when workload gets placed, it always gets placed the most optimal way, that when we place it next time, we expect the same results out of it. So this is something that from our side, we will, those best known methods and what those optional descriptor fields are, we will contribute from our side into that.
So basically what you're saying is that you will see a couple of things happening. First of all, the languages that are, have certain capabilities that are good in one scenario. It's not one size fits all. It's a combination of them. For example, Tosca and Young Yang for network configuration, Tosca for the application topology.
I don't want to make my judgment on that.
Okay,
this is the industry consensus that needs to be reached.
Sure.
Because if half industry goes one way, half goes the other way, it's not that bad, as we had some other cases in telco standardization. It would be only two. But ideally, to describe firewall, to describe EPC functionalities and so on, we will have one way of describing it. What is seen as beneficial is if this is information model driven design and not function driven design, because then we define functions, interfaces, then everybody starts having their own assumptions on what is being passed on. And so these are some things that smart people doing the standardization contributions will worry about. The other thing that also in these standardization efforts we would ideally like to see as outcome is when we talked about convergence of telco environments and IT enterprise cloud environments, they are designed on different principles, and we came to different architectures from one versus the other. So now when they have to converge, we cannot just converge the environment, we need to converge the architectures, and when we do the thinking about those, we have to take care of it. So now is the thinking time, and we need to think also about how carrier grades from telco world looks like, but also if the desire is to reach hyperscale cloud type of environment, now is the time to take the thinking on that and really define the principles and implement it in architectural stacks. And ideally, the underlying information model stays the same and can feed the purposes of different implementations. And that's the hope for now.
So Arthur, I think maybe kind of closing questions on that. You mentioned Project Aria, and I think one of the things that I think we've discussed is how do we get to the point where instead of having a lot of different orchestration that implements their own version of the truth, we can reduce that barrier and at least get some common substrate that everyone can build on top, but at least that will create that common language that I think Petar was referring to in the open source kind of way. Can you describe how Project Aria is aimed to deal with that?
Right. So first of all, Project Aria's goal is to be a lightweight orchestration tool, simple implementation of Tosca, and the whole its success criteria is to be easily integrated into other systems. Like its goal is not to be consumed or used as a whole orchestration solution, rather be easily easily used to introduce new VNFs, to be easily introduced into other orchestration platforms. And the goal there is for us to have a common solution rather than fighting who's implementing the right solution or the best solution, for us to have a common ground to start building on top of. That's like the main goal of the project.
Excellent. So again, if I would like to wrap it up, I'll let each one of you say a closing remark, and then I'll close it up. So I'll start with you.
This has been a really positive show for us. It has been hugely busy, and my head hurts at this point after 4 days.
I could well sympathize with that.
But NFV absolutely just seems to be taking off. It really seems to be real. I was a bit worried 12, 18 months ago it was going to be a science project. People will play with it, but not actually deploy it in the networks. But it does seem to have sufficient momentum that it's going to get rolled out. AT&T is pushing hard. I think we're going to see it in big carrier networks, very widely deployed.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. It's no longer just an early adopter type project. It's becoming the industry standard, and it's just going to continue to grow from here. So it's exciting stuff to see.
Petar.
Regarding the event, on our booth we have a T-shirt saying "I've survived Mobile World Congress." Can I have one? Yes, come over there, please. So this is indeed exciting to see how NFV is rolling out, and as we continue doing that, we also lay the path towards what will happen in terms of transforming the mobile edge to get intelligence in terms of mobile edge computing or whatever edge computing. And also it's very exciting to see what is happening towards 5G. So to also get intelligence of compute onto all these mobile base stations and all sorts of other cells. So it's very,
Very interesting. And if I may add my comments to that, I mean, we last year, just looking at how many people we sent to Mobile World Congress year after year, then obviously 3 years ago we haven't sent anyone. And last year we're just sneaking around, and I think that was our first meeting with VMware, friend introduction. The way I kind of see where we're basically seeing that something is serious is if we send Sharon in. So if we send Sharon in, that means that we do identify that as a business. We obviously sent much more people to this event than we used to. So usually that's a clear threshold. If you see Sharon, you know that we're treating that seriously. So that's kind of the LACMOS test that I can testify for. I think that's give you Arthur the closing remark.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to see, the open source and openness and open discussions happening between vendors and the whole momentum going forward. Having an open platform and open standards that basically define, let the industry move forward and actually help make actual real world implementation. And definitely, I think this is like the key for me, at least the key things that I come out with from this event.
Yeah, so one last point to close out, I think that having this podcast and having all those people in the room is actually testifying in itself on the changes. It's no longer a collaboration. It used to be like joint paperwork or joint something. It's actually an integration work, joint standardization, joint product delivery. It's real deep type of partnership. The fact that we even share a booth with Metaswitch here, and obviously within VMware and also within Intel, is also a sign for that type of ecosystem being realizing that it's no longer one player that is going to solve everything. It's actually the one that will enable to build an ecosystem and partner well with the ecosystem is going to be able to actually survive that change and even lead that. And I think the type of discussion here is an indication of that as well. So I wanted to thank you all for participating in that very interesting podcast. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.